Good morning, everybody. Now for something quite different. Not completely different, but quite different to all the technical issues we talk about. It is a difficult subject. What we're talking about is understanding what is important about a building. I've been dealing with significance since the late 1990s when we needed a grant. £10 million was on the table from the Heritage Lottery Fund for Cardiff Castle in the late 1990s. And we can only have that money if we produced a conservation plan. The thing is, nobody knew what they were. There was no guidance. And very fortunate for me, somebody came over the border from England, Kate Clark, who was an Australian, that brought the Australian way of looking at heritage into the UK. And she's working for what was English Heritage then. She wasn't really allowed to help us, but she wanted to. And that was my first introduction to this very complex subject. And I've been dealing with it ever since. And I get better and better and better at it every time I do it because it's that sort of subject. Anyway, I haven't got very long to explain this very difficult topic, but I'll do my best. You might wonder whether it's relevant to you. Lots of people wonder whether it's relevant to themselves. Well, it is. Because if you look at all these documents, we've talked about the joint statement, but if you look at these BSI standards on retrofitting buildings, they all contain reference to the need to understand the significance of a building. So we all must understand it. To some degree, it depends on what our role is. Now, these are the words from BS 7913. I was fortunate enough to lead a very talented group of people in producing this document. But again, there's a lot of arguments and debate about how do we assess significance. But as far as I can say to you today, in the limited time I've got, it's about understanding a building in its entirety. All the features, all the elements, all the spaces, the use of the building, the associations that the building has, the setting of the building, everything. You need to understand everything, and you have to go through a process in order to actually determine that understanding as best we can. And as Steve said, it's subjective. It's very subjective. But what we have to do is work within frameworks which bring about as much objectivity as we possibly can. And that's the idea of this. So in practice, we do all the things I've just spoken about, but we'll break our building down into logical units. Those logical units will be very different. It depends on the building, the issues, the type of building, wherever it is. We break the building down into logical units. And we assess each part of that building against a criteria. And the criteria is heritage values, or a set of heritage values. And what we'll also do is adopt other criteria, such as whether the significance is local, national, international, or whether the significance has all the attributes present, some or none. We'll build that into other sets of criteria, which will determine the level of significance. Because not all parts of a building will have the same level of significance. And if we are to be proportionate in the way we look at buildings and treat buildings, then we need to be proportionate in the way we're assessing the significance. And that's where the starting point is. So these are the group heritage values that appear in BS 7913. There's individual values as well, but I would suggest if you're going to do a significance analysis, you use the group values. So the aesthetic value is, as you can see on the screen, is the way we emotionally feel about the aesthetics of a building, bearing in mind that that many buildings will have an aesthetic hierarchy. Many buildings were designed to have better aesthetics on the front than the rear, for example. Some interiors were designed to be more aesthetically pleasing than other interiors. So you have to factor that in. We also have to factor in the changes which may have taken place to the aesthetics of the building. So we analyse all of that and a lot more. When it comes to the communal value, this is the way in which individuals and groups of individuals emotionally connect with a building today and in their living memory. For most buildings, this is a very difficult thing to do. But one building I'm working on at the moment, which is the London Coliseum for the English National Opera, that's quite easy to actually develop the communal value there because we can see the way people will connect with that building because it's an entertainment venue. With a house, it's different. In terms of the evidential value, this is about the way the building provides evidence of the past. in many different ways. For example, the scale and form of a building could indicate the sort of people who might have lived in that building, down to the scars of alterations which may have taken place in the past. They're all evidence. And then we got the historical value, and that's the historical association that the building has with history. Is there a particular reason in history why the building was built in the first place or went through significant change? Did an historical event take place in that building? And that sort of thing. And one of the biggest mistakes many people make, and even some bodies such as heritage bodies make, when they say that all these values are historical values, they are not. These are heritage values, and the historic value is just one of them. I just want to quickly show you a brief case study. This is a project I'm currently working on in Swansea. It's a row of 8 Georgian houses converted into apartments in about 1981. And we are currently working with a team of people where we're refurbishing these flats, these apartments, maybe reducing the number of them and retrofitting the building and doing all sorts of things to the building. It's a listed building, so we have to analyse its significance. So if you look at the images on the left-hand side, they are the images of the building today. So let's compare the front with the rear. And what I'm trying to say here is that when you're analysing the significance of the building, you're going well beyond looking at the building itself. You've got to analyse all the documents you can actually locate in archives, museums, libraries, etc. You've got to analyse all of this. And in doing this, I'll explain this very briefly, if you look at these images, the central image at the top, that's what Cambion Place looked like in 1967. And what you can get from that is that there are dormers in the roof. There aren't dormers today. Also the fact that the iron railings, actually, they were incomplete in 1967. Look at another image now in the top right-hand corner, 1979. The building's almost derelict. Most of the windows are gone, nearly all the door sets are gone, there's no iron railings. And then when you relate that to what Cambion Place looks like today at the front, in the top left-hand image, you can see that today it's fairly complete, those aesthetics. But what you can also get from that is many of the things we're looking at are not original. Now, when you're looking at the bottom images, it is a bit light in here, so probably you can't really see the bottom image very clearly, but you're looking at how the rear of that building looks like today. And when you compare it with what it looked like in 1967, we have a greater number of extensions. The extensions go to the top floor of the building. We got the openings are in different proportions, and we've even got arched openings as well. Today, that no longer exists. We got openings which have got modern dimensions. We've got modern render materials. We haven't got any arched openings. The extensions are less in number and they've been reduced in height. So by looking into archive information, we can readily see the changes which have taken place, and all these affect the significance. The other thing we've got to do is look at maps and plans and all of that, so we can actually see what changes have taken place. So if you look at the photograph on the left-hand side, you can see the Cambion Place in the past, sometime between 1920 and 1939. It had a building built immediately adjacent to it. That tells us that at that particular moment in time, and that information is amplified by looking at the map from the past, that you could not see the rear of the building in the past. You weren't meant to see the rear of the building in the past. Even if it was in its complete form today, you weren't meant to see it. Now, what we've got to do, we've got to map out the actual age of the construction. So what we've done here, for example, in red, you can see the original construction. So you've got the enclosing walls, you've got the walls dividing each of the original 8 houses, and you've also got some original partitions as well. They are original. Anything that's not coloured in red is not original. So that's one of the starting points we will take when we're analysing that significance. When we look at the aesthetics, I've already mentioned the aesthetic hierarchy, but we can also see that the rear has been substantially altered. The front, the way it looks today, actually it looks fairly complete. Not all the attributes are present because we no longer got the dormer windows, but there is sufficient attributes present to say that the front has aesthetic significance, but the rear has no aesthetic significance. That's the way we're analysing that. And when we're looking at the evidential value, what we're saying is the size and form of these individual houses tell us that, what sort of people lived in these houses. Were they the poorest people in Swansea, or were they the richest? Actually, they were the richest. This is where the upper echelons of society in Swansea lived. So that the scale and form of each individual house is telling us that. It's going to tell us a lot of other things as well. But the rear doesn't really tell us anything, does it really? I mean, what does it look like today? It doesn't look very good, does it really? It doesn't tell us much. So as far as that is concerned, we're saying, as far as evidential significance is concerned, the front does have evidential significance, but the rear probably has low evidential significance. All of this is subjective, of course. And then we look at the communal value, and this is a difficult one. But if you live in this part of the world, I think you might appreciate walking down Cambion Place, looking at the front of the property. You may emotionally connect with it. And if somebody was to say, we're going to demolish this building, there'd probably be uproar because why are you going to demolish this building? It looks so good, it's part of our community. But when you're looking at the rear, you could be anywhere really, who can emotionally connect with that. So what we're saying is that, therefore, the front does have some or low communal significance, maybe not much more than that, but the rear doesn't have any communal significance. And then we look at the historical side of that. Looking at the building isn't going to help us understand the historical significance of that building. But when we look at archive information, we will realise something very important. When you look at that terraced house, when you look at that terrace there, you look immediately to the left of it, on the top image, you see it's built up against another building. Those are the assembly rooms in Swansea, and that tells you something in itself. Well, this must have been a very important place in the past, and it was. And when you look at the archival information, you will see that the reason why this terrace was built is because Swansea Council, whoever it was at that time, had a vision that Swansea was to be the Brighton of Wales. Okay, Cambion Place was built. It was facing onto a sandy beach. It was a lovely area. And then the Industrial Revolution came along and changed everything. So that, in that sense, we can give it historical significance for the front, but maybe not the rear. Now, all of this is subjective. Okay, it's all subjective, and we map all of this out on a plan where we got the red is significant. You can see what the other levels are there. And in order to get to this particular stage, we will consult with other people. This is a Georgian building. We'll consult with the Georgian Society. We'll consult with a conservation officer and other people as well, in order to get their views and opinions, expert views and opinions on whether we got these significant levels correct. But the other thing you'll note here is that if you're the architect and you're designing alterations to this building, you are going to use these levels of significance as a framework. You don't really want to do too much to the areas which are in red, but there's a greater scope for change for the other coloured areas. Okay, so that's the way it works. And we map it out also on elevations as well. Now, when we got these 4 group heritage values, we may have different levels of significance in terms of the aesthetics, historical, etc. So what we're going to have to do is a comparative exercise then, another exercise we go through to make sure that, the level of significance for, say, the front elevation is the right level when we're comparing it with the levels of significance of the other areas as well. And that means delving into the detail of the 4 group heritage values. I told you it was complicated. It is, and subjective. But we don't do this for the fun of it. We do it to enable good decision making. And what you're seeing here is a chart I drew up for a publication from the CIOB. I wrote it about 2 years ago. If you're a CIOB member, you can get it for nothing. If you're not, you have to pay a small sum of money. But it's got a chart within it, and you can see where it takes you. So you've got stages 1 and 2. Whether 1 and 2 come in that order doesn't really matter. In fact, in theory, number 2 should be number 1. But what you'll see in number 1, we're going to understand the building from a technical perspective, the sort of things we've been talking about this morning already, the construction, the materials, the condition, how the use affects the building, how the environment affects the building, and all that sort of thing. And then we come on to that significance analysis that I've just been spoken about now. And once we've done 1 and 2, we do stage 3. Stage 3 means we can now develop our proposals, maybe a number of different options of what we want to do, and we will come to a conclusion based upon the very good knowledge that we've gleaned from number 1 and number 2. And then, at that particular stage where we know what we want to do, we will test those proposals in terms of the impact that they will have on the significance of the building by undertaking heritage impact assessments. And I'll show you one of them in a moment. But if I show you another one of my projects, this is one of my projects here. No, it's not the Shard. If you know me, I wouldn't be involved with the Shard, would I? the UK's tallest building. I'm involved with the Hop Exchange, built in 1861. Now the Shard, if you look on Wikipedia, it might surprise you, it took over 1,300 tonnes to construct, tonnes of carbon to construct, and it was built in 2013. And what do you think the lifespan is? What's the lifespan of that building? Anybody know? 60 years. 60 years, that's right, 60 years. That's what it says on Wikipedia. It's got a lifespan of 60 years. The Hop Exchange has already been around for over 160 years. But what we're trying to say is that buildings like the Hop Exchange and other existing buildings need to be around for a long time. If we want to be the most carbon efficient we can be by 2050, we must stop demolishing buildings, we must retain existing buildings, make them more energy efficient, and maybe repurpose them. And this Grade 2 listed building here, the Hop Exchange, yes, to sustain it into the future, it must have an economic future as well. So we're going to put a big extension on the rear, we're going to punch a hole through the building, not literally. So you've got an arcade going from Southwark Street down to into Borough Market, and we're going to extend the height of the building. The only way we can demonstrate all that is to actually understand the building in terms of its significance. Its significance, and that's what we have done. We've understood its significance. We produced that in a heritage statement. You can see the top right-hand corner. And then we do our heritage impact assessments in a separate document. And if I can just, if you've got very good vision and you are good at speed reading, you'll be able to read all this. But I'll just set out basically what we're trying to do. So in the first column, we're stating what we need to do. We want to increase the height of the building. Then we state, what is the reason for doing this, okay? I haven't got time to tell you the reason here today because I've only got 20 minutes. Then we got the next column is, what is the significance? And all that information on significance comes from the heritage statement. And then we got the next column there, followed by the next column, which is the reference and research column, whereby anybody reading this heritage impact assessment can look at these other sections of these other reports where they can get the more detailed information for people to realise we're not just making all this up, they are detailed in reports in detail. And in the next column, we got the possible impact on significance, followed by the mitigation. If there is impact on significance, let's state how that can be mitigated. And then we'll look at the other options that we've considered and rejected. And we must have this column. We must have this column because otherwise, if you're using this heritage impact assessment to get consent, you know what's going to happen. The conservation officer will look at it. Why didn't you consider this? Why didn't you consider that? Actually, we considered all these things, and these are the reasons why we rejected them. And then finally, we have the conclusions. And that is a heritage impact assessment for a project like that, for a project on a listed building, a building with special protection. But of course, over 90% of traditional buildings don't have any special protection whatsoever. Are we going to treat them the same? Well, if we do, we're not being proportionate, are we? Because if unprotected traditional buildings were just as important as significant as listed buildings, then they would be listed, wouldn't they? And they're not, for a very good reason. So we need to be proportionate. So when we're looking at significance here, in these types of buildings, maybe we should be focusing on character and appearance. Character and appearance and materials, that sort of thing, rather than the sort of process I've taken you through just now. So when you're looking at a building, are there original features and elements present? Yes or no? There could be, there may not be. Are the original materials present? Yes or no? When we want to do work to a building, when we've set up some proposals of the things we want to do to a building, what impact will those proposals have on those significance, have on the character and appearance and the materials? What sort of impact will there be? Not much, then maybe you can go ahead. If there is too much, then we need to look at alternative proposals. So if we look at these front elevations of these three traditional buildings here, are they significant or are they not? Well, if we look at the first one, well, I'd say it is, wouldn't you? Lots of character, lots of features, all the original materials are present there. You can clearly see them, just like when the building was built. So that does have significance. When we look at the second property, is that significant? You can't see any of the original materials. You can't see any of the original features. Maybe the answer is no. And when we look at the final property, does that have significance? All the original materials are present. all the features are present, even though some of those features, you know, the band of brick around the openings have been painted. But I would say, yeah, that does have significance. But what we need to do is, once we determine significance, of course, is measure the impact that our proposals will have on that significance. Now, I'm showing you this document here, not because I used to work for CADU, I used to work for Historic England. I'm showing you this document here because this is the only current document describing heritage impact assessments by any heritage body in the UK. Historic England have got a document that goes back to 2008 and originally 2001. But this is a document from 2017, and the other reason why I'm showing it to you, because this is a very basic way of undertaking a heritage impact assessment, and maybe this is the sort of thing we should be adopting when we're looking at traditional buildings which do not have any special protection. I would suggest this is the approach that we should be taking. So when we're looking at this building here, we've already agreed, and we've already agreed it has significance, and we want to propose external wall insulation. So let's do a heritage impact assessment. So that heritage impact assessment will state in the first column the proposed work. External wall insulation to the front elevation. The objective, because we must always state what the objective is. Why do we want to do this? What do we want to achieve? Well, what we want to achieve here is to improve the energy performance of the building. The next column is significance of fabric affected. And what we're saying here is the front elevation has features and has original stone and brick, and therefore deemed significant, and adjacent houses very similar. I think we need to make that observation when we've got a terraced house. And then we've got assessing the beneficial impact. Well, it will improve energy performance of the building and improve its energy rating, so it could be let. But what about the harmful impact? So then we got columns assessing the harmful impact, and that says, will remove sight of the original materials and features, plus harm the appearance compared to the neighbours, alter the appearance at the junction with the roof. Okay? So now we know. And now we can come to the conclusion, which would be the impact is too great, and therefore other solutions should be found that will improve the energy performance. A very basic heritage impact assessment, which I would say is a sort of heritage impact assessment that would be suitable for a traditional, unprotected building. There's not many other places where you can get more information, I'm afraid. There's very little written on this subject. Look at BS 7913, or you could also do one of my courses. Thank you for listening. Okay.